career started in 1970 when I was admitted as a law student at the University of Kansas Law School. And at that time, we were the largest class of women, and I think there were 13 of us in a class of 180. And I went to law school without any notion of what that would mean at the end of the 3 years. I was motivated to get additional education because my undergraduate degree from KU was in history and American studies, and I didn't want to be a secretary or go for a master's in that field. So I thought I would try law school. I think one of the fun stories about this is I took the LSAT in the fall of 1969, and then went over to the law school after that and asked if I might see the dean. And I asked him in a very short and a simple meeting if they admitted women to law school, because I didn't know any women who had gone to law school at that point in time. And I'd never really known a woman lawyer. So it just didn't have any gender familiarity to me. There was one lawyer in my family. He was an uncle. He was 17 years older than I was, but he was never someone who said, you know, I hope you'll follow in my footsteps or something like that. I did have an opportunity to work with him one summer. He was a county attorney in Barton County, and so I got a little whiff, and I was in college at the time, of what that work involved. But I think more than anything, I grew up in a family that was very civic-minded and very concerned and interested in politics in terms of quality of candidates for public office. And I think that civics background was a real influence in terms of my understanding that public service is something that is honorable and noble, and maybe I connected the opportunity for public service with a law degree by the time I did that in 1970. But one of the strange parts about that choice was that I took the test. I was waiting on the acceptance letter to law school. I was in Paris, France. I called home, and I was told by my parents that it was 4th of July, 1970. They said, well, Karen, we got this letter from KU Law School. Do you want us to open it? I said, sure, go ahead. And it indicated that I'd been admitted, and I was happy. But at the time, I was in Paris, France, thinking about spending the rest of my life in Europe or some, romantic, exotic life like that. So at the moment, I didn't know what I was going to do. Eventually, the summer ended, I came home, and it was a good decision to come back and to go on and do law school. But I was not a star student in law school. And I want to acknowledge that for people who have the same experience. I had been a way above average student undergraduate at KU. And I thought I was academically on top of things. So I went to law school, and I didn't have that same experience. The first semester in law school, I took 5 classes, and I got 1 A, and I got 2 C pluses, and I got 2 C's. And they posted these grades by your student number on a bulletin board so that you would know what you got. And when I saw those C's, I was horrified. And I really felt like I was not cut out for law school. So I really had a soul-searching session with myself about whether to even come back the second semester. And I decided, and I did this thoughtfully and soberly, to give it another semester. But the deal I made with myself was that I had to not just improve my grades, but improve my grade point average. So I did that in the second semester. So then I had to make a decision about the third semester. So each semester of law school, so what were there, 6 semesters, every semester I had to make I had to bring the entire GPA up. So basically I boxed myself in on this self-promise so that I had to get straight A's by the end of my last semester. I didn't realize that was what the deal was, but it worked out well. And I think I finally figured out how to be a better law student. But it was challenging to me. And I think it tended to create self-doubt about whether I had chosen the right field. And that self-doubt lingered for many years, even as a practicing lawyer. One of the things that I don't want to minimize about law school is that I appreciated some of the professors so much. They were new to having women students, and some of them were older and not, they were used to just having guys in law school. And while I was in law school, the first woman professor joined the faculty. And so that was one of the first. But some of them, I think, had a kind approach that allowed me to see that you just don't have to be, as an advocate, a fist-pounding, hard-nosed person for every situation, that you need to have different ways of approaching your presentation in court or your engagement with a client and that sort of thing. The studies and the academic part wasn't terrifying because I came right out of undergraduate, so I was still in student mode. But there were so many doubts and skeptical comments made about why the women were in law school. And that was scary because I'd never been challenged before about, well, why are you here? We even had a professor suggest that the women that in law school were taking places that should more rightfully be occupied by men. And it's stunning to hear that. And many times it was suggested that we were there because we were in search of husbands. And so that our motivation was not accepted as truly wanting to be lawyers and whatever that meant. And one of the vivid memories I have is that they would call the roll of the students in class on the first day or two so that the seating assignment, they knew the name of that person sitting in those seats. And the classes were pretty big. They would have been 90 people maybe. These were first-year classes. And when they got to the women's names, they said, now, and trying to be very polite, the male professors would say, is that Miss or Mrs. Humphreys? And I got very uncomfortable when these questions were asked because I was not wanting to be perceived as someone who was there to find a husband and to get married. And I also didn't want to establish on day one that I was unmarried and available for male law students to date. And so that was just a horrific experience to me. And the term Ms. was brand new, and they weren't using it in law school. And I thought they should. I wasn't, just a radical feminist, but I wasn't. I was very sympathetic, and I was a feminist, maybe just not of the radical version. And I couldn't understand this at all. So basically, on day one, the marital status of the women students was broadcast in the roll call. My mindset as a very young and inexperienced lawyer was just grabbing a hold of every day and learning as much as I could. I remember, for whatever reason, the first answer pleading that I had to draft when I was with legal aid, I think I spent a week working it and working it and working it because I didn't want to omit any affirmative defense that might be available in a consumer credit dispute. And fast forward that experience to about 10 years later, I was in private practice and I was drafting another pleading. And I remember catching myself in the act of doing that, with this aha moment where I realized I was doing it naturally, that I had become a lawyer and that I had this capacity to do what I was doing. And so there was that before and after picture, if you will, in my mind of this young lawyer who was scared to death to file this answer without, exhausting every possible defense. And then this older lawyer, 10 years later, that had gained some experience and some comfort with understanding how to practice law. Working with legal aid, I had a phone call from Mary Briscoe, who was then working in the United States Attorney's Office. And we had stayed in touch, but not intensely. And she said, "Karen, we have a vacancy in our office, and frankly, I want to be sure that a qualified woman is considered for the position, and I think you have the right background for this particular job. Would you be interested?" And I said yes. And then she explained that the job involved representing the United States in condemnation work. And at this time in the history of Kansas, so this would have been in the late 70s and early 80s, the Army Corps of Engineers was still engaging in the condemnation and the construction of water reservoirs for flood control. And Clinton Lake around Lawrence was one of those, and there were many others. Anyway, I did happen to have some of the background with my real estate work from IRS that had me familiar with how real estate is appraised and valued and how to present that kind of testimony in a courtroom setting. So that was the job that I took in 1978. And Mary was my colleague along with about 3 other fellows. And at that time, the United States Attorney was a person named Jim Buckley. And Jim, this was in the Jimmy Carter administration, and Jim was very determined to extend employment opportunities to women lawyers. And so there was this great opportunity in Kansas City, Topeka, and Wichita, where the U.S. Attorney's offices were, for women to get employed. And then it was time to move on after a couple of years, and I went into private practice with a bankruptcy boutique firm. It's called Redmond and Nazar, and I was there for a short time, a little more than a year, and I found that I liked the practice of bankruptcy law, but I wasn't real comfortable specializing. Everything that I had done up until that time had allowed me to be kind of more general in the things that I did, and I think I needed a broader base, I guess, in terms of the content and the subject matter. So from the private practice experience, I went back to the United States working for FDIC, still doing a lot of bankruptcy practice. And then while I was working at FDIC, again here in Wichita, I was encouraged to apply for a vacancy on the Sedgwick County District Court trial position, and Governor Mike Hayden selected me, appointed me to a vacancy, and that began my judicial career in 1987. So my first assignment as a trial judge was in the juvenile court system, and that's where my legal aid background kind of came into play, and I had familiarity with the legal problems of the clients that appeared in juvenile court. And I benefited greatly from that time and learning some skills as a judge. I did child in need of care cases, which are heartaches, and there's some very sad stories I could tell about that, but let me take a break from sadness and say that I went back downtown and I did the full regimen in the Sedgwick County system, which was departmentalized. So I was in the traffic court, I was in the criminal court, trying jury trials. I was in the civil court trying jury trials and managing cases. And about 6 years into all of that, I had an opportunity to submit an application for the position that I'm still in 20 years later. I was appointed in a merit selection process by the judges of the United States District Court to be a magistrate judge, and those terms are for 8 years. So I am now in about halfway through my third term. So I've been a magistrate judge for almost 21 years, and I've enjoyed every day of it. It has given me the opportunity to be in a courtroom with great frequency, not daily necessarily, but certainly with great frequency. But it's allowed me also to learn the skills of a mediator, and I always enjoy the opportunities that are presented to serve as a mediator because they allow me to be with the parties. And that kind of harkens back to my time of representing clients. I don't represent the parties in the lawsuit, but I can listen and help them come to some choices and decisions about what they want to do with their litigation. And so that's been a source of joy because it has made me a better judge. And the other thing that's made me a better judge is in the last 5 years, I have worked with a small group of dedicated people, lawyers and drug counselors and probation officers, in the creation of a reentry court for adults who have served their prison sentence, who come back into the community and are under supervision. And they volunteer to be in a reentry court. And so if they are successful after 1 year in the reentry court, they can then get a year off their supervised release time, and it shortens the period of time. But during that time, they're practicing sobriety, they're learning how to find employment, they're relearning how to be in relationships with significant family members, and for many of them, the joy that they have in reconnecting with their children is a very powerful source of motivation for them to not go back to prison. So anyway, that has just been a wonderful part of the last 5 years of my life as a judge. There are, not everybody loves judges, and so there are downsides to it, and there are members of my family that don't love me as a judge because sometimes it's hard to leave it at home. I mean, leave it at the office and just be, after a long period of time, 26 years, you start, maybe acting like a judge in everything you do, which is a whole nother subject. But the calling part is serious. And I think some people are not really cut out to be judges, and others are. And I think I'm probably someone who was, and I didn't know it for a long time. I'm very identified by this profession in my own self-image. And it's been a wonderful place to live life. It covers everything. Every possible problem that we have as human beings has crossed my threshold as a human being, as a lawyer and as a judge. And it's so rich. And I don't mean rich in the sense of personal wealth, but I mean rich in the sense of how I've learned about what it means to be a human being. And so people have these conflicts that they can't resolve without resorting to the legal system, and then, God forbid, to judges and juries to decide the questions for them. And to do it with compassion and humanity and the intelligence that's accumulated through the study of law and the practice of law is just been beyond any expectation that I had.